Hello everyone, welcome to Speedway Motors Museum of American Speed. My name's Tim and I'm the curator here, and I'm so happy to be here with a great friend of the museum and really an icon of the custom car world, Dan Woods. And you might recognize the name. When he was 18 years old, he built the milk truck, and later, after a stint in Vietnam, came back and created the ice truck and some other fantastic cars and helped Ed Roth at his studio. We could go on and on. But what we're here to talk about today is this car that's sitting right behind us, the Bucciali. And this is really a custom car, and I've got to admit just a short story about how when I first came to the museum and I laid eyes on the Bucciali for the first time. I got to admit, I'm an old school hot rodder, but I immediately fell in love with this thing. It looks like a Duesenberg with a chopped top, so what's not to love? But the cool thing about Dan is he's been involved with this car since the beginning when it was being built. Maybe not since the very beginning, but you know, while it was being built, and he's racked up more miles in this car than anyone else. I think, what was it, Dan?
About 14,000.
So
on the LA freeways.
And I can't even imagine.
Beverly Hills roads.
Dan, tell us a little bit about how you went from working for Ed Roth and then transitioning into working for Mr. Tishman, who was building this particular car. That's a fascinating story.
Well, you know, I basically finished my first car when I was young, and I went to the very first car show I went to, and I won grand sweepstakes with my milk truck, and nobody even knew who I was. I didn't know anybody. And subsequently, when I finished it, and the second car show I went to, Ed Roth approached me, and I really didn't even know who he was. And he asked me if I'd like to come to work. I was going to junior college then. I had just graduated high school. So we talked, and it sounded like a fun thing. He was going to build what's called the Druid Princess, and it was for the Addams Family TV show. And we went to work there and worked on that for probably 8 or 10 months, or whatever, until we got that finished. And then started another car, which Captain Pepe's hauler, which hauled a motorcycle. It was an offset vehicle. And then I got drafted. So I went to Vietnam, did my stint, came back, and started building cars on the side, et cetera, and ended up in a successful business and set some very early precedents where you could mail order parts, which you guys have done forever. And then in 1981, I got tired and burnt out, just working I was working 20 hours a day, and it's a passion that drives you. So when I shut my shop down, I got a phone call, and it was Mr. Tishman, and he said, "I'd like to have lunch with you." Well, people aren't aware of who Mr. Tishman is. The Tishman family built New York City, over 4,000 high-rises. They built the World Trade Center, not just once, but now the second time. They built Disney World, the Hancock Building, and Century Boulevard. So everybody knew who he was. And so I went to lunch. Next thing I know, I had been hired by him. And not to be on the car thing, he had hired a couple of my ex-employees to work on this car. And I knew about the car through all these people in Los Angeles who are active in the car world, and we knew it was something special. And once I got involved, it was just amazing. I don't think the world will ever see anything else done like this, because Mr. Tishman looked me in the face and says, "Dan, this is Tishman University. I've built the biggest, my family and I have built the biggest and finest buildings in the world. What more can I do? They can only get taller, they can only get bigger, but they're still a building. And when you do an automobile, there's so many little finite details that have to be thought out and learned about." So I was active with this car for 8 years. It's got so many unique, hard to fathom details in it, and every one of them was overseen by Mr. Tishman. And at the end of the day, he put $1.3 million of his money into this vehicle. I mean, there isn't hardly any production, anything. The front end and rear ends are out of a 70, I think it was 8 or 76 Blazer. The block and the heads are Chevy small block, and it's got an automatic transmission with a transfer case that runs full time, and it's full-time four-wheel drive. He went so far as to even make the molds for the tires, which say Bucciali on it, because he was bound and determined. If you look over here, there's a license plate that says only one. He wanted to make sure, and the headlight are off of the only thing that he used off of another car. So
That's unbelievable. And the coach work is pretty amazing. When you look at this thing, you were showing me the fenders. I mean, they're a double-lined fender, which is pretty interesting, but I mean, it's not just real thin steel. What gauge steel do you use?
16 gauge, and this is the
like a tank.
in Los Angeles, in the hot rod world, California metal shaping was known all over. They had the old school equipment, and he had Don Borth and some of the finest handcrafted metal people. There's not an ounce of Bondo in this car. There's hardly any lead, and it's 16 gauge steel, which is hard to work. And these people, they World War II building aircraft aluminum parts and then metal, and then they also did all the Airstream trailer fronts and the backs. And it was just a labor. They would do something. It all started from this picture he saw of a Bucciali built by these two brothers in Italy that made organs. And it was the first car at the Paris show that had full-time four-wheel drive, and it was very unique. And he searched the world because he wanted one so bad.
Yeah.
Could not find it, made his mind up that he wasn't going to recreate it perfectly. He was going to call it the essence of the Bucciali. So, you know, if anybody knows that's seen a Duesenberg or a Lincoln or anything, you never have the fenders higher than the hood. You know, it just was, even in an underslung car, it's never been. So there's so many unprecedented things, and then he wanted it to have all hoods clamshell. They have to be straight. You can't bend a piece of metal with a hinge in it and have it open and shut. So this hinge is actuated by an aircraft actuator. When you hit a button, the hood opens up as a big clam and then comes back down. And there's locks. And the other thing, he created this thing, and he just was insistent that everything had a redundancy. So there's a second circuit. If that breaks, there's another circuit. And this vehicle has got over 5,000 circuits.
Wow, unbelievable. Did you ever have to tinker with the wiring, or was, because
you've
done some tuning on this car, I know
yes, sir.
that.
You know, we had to do, it was a long, you know, a lot of people had taken him down the wrong paths, and when I got involved, it was easy. You know, we just slowly start front to rear. I'd take it on test drives, we had so many miles on it, and make sure everything. And he probably spent, and without exaggeration, $200,000 on springs. He had military leaf springs, he had oval springs, he had reverse springs, he had all these different springs as he was, and then he'd bring because he, like it earlier said, he called it the Tishman University. And he loved, because he could learn off this. He was a Cornell graduate. He went to Cornell University, an engineering degree. But he was fascinated by this whole process. Dynamics of the wheels being so big, you know, what that did to the ride quality. Mm-hmm. He would bring on board, Lee Iacocca was his friend, and if you look up there, there's a picture of this clay model, and they built I think it was 1/3 scale clay model like they used to do at the factories. Sure. Then he made a full-size drawing and hung it on the wall, and that's how they started building it.
That's amazing. Yeah, and you know, thinking about the car itself, you know, once it was completed, did Tishman drive it all that often? He drove it
I'm not saying he's afraid of it. He loved taking it to events in Los Angeles that were close, you know, and he loved displaying it and talking to people about it.
Yeah,
that was his passion. He really was fascinated, and it got worldwide attention. And there, the other side of this coin is he's a very wealthy man. His name's known throughout the world, and it was always, oh, this man spent over $1 million. And at the time this car was done, no car on earth had ever brought $1 million in value, sale or otherwise. A Bugatti Royale was like $500,000 or $400,000, and they were considered the holy grail.
Right.
And for somebody to spend $1.3 million building something, and I've got a funny story to tell. When he went to register it in California, they have a thing called special construction, because this has got no VIN number. So he called the DMV, you know, himself, and told him, you know, because he wanted to drive it, obviously. And whoever answered the phone said, well, all you do, you bring down your receipts for what you spent on the car to prove, you know, the motor and everything. So him being this honest person shows up with, and I can't imagine, we all laugh about it all the time, to the counter at the DMV with $1,300,000 worth of receipts for his car. You know, and in California, it's a percentage of the value of the car is what the tags cost. So we used to joke about it every year. that little tag that goes on that license plate costs $13,000 a year to register the thing.
Oh,
He says,
no.
Dan, that was not a good move. We used to laugh about it every year. He goes, I really screwed up there.
Well, I know Speedy Bill, once he took possession of it, he loved to drive it. He'd take it to the Culver's drive-through, and you know, they used to have a little car get-together there, and he and Joyce would cruise down in this thing. And I couldn't imagine looking through the windshield of this car. That hood goes on forever. And you tell some stories, because you used to like pick up dates in this car?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was single at the time, I had the key. I could do, you know, I would ask. I mean, he said, you don't even need to ask, but, you know, because I was there all the time. He says, if you want to use it, just take it. You know, I took it out to the desert to my mom and dad's in Palm Springs. But when you're driving it, it's hard to explain to people. When I've driven cars my whole life that are unusual. So obviously everybody's looking at you, and that's something you have to be aware of, because they start coming close to you. You know, they're paying attention, and you've got $1,300,000 at your steering wheel. And the ride's, you know, and it shifts well. It does everything it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it does it correctly. And he was a fanatic about the air conditioning. You know, we went through just tons of different iterations of air conditioning, and he wanted it to be 61 degrees inside there if it was 120 outside. So the thermodynamics, I'd have to take it up the ridge route in LA sometimes twice in a week because it was 112 out. He wanted to see how it did. We put sensors all over it. He had scientists come. It was literally Tishman University. I had some of the most incredible experiences with these people you would never even get to talk to normally. He would pay them, bring them to our shop, and we'd deal with it.
Well, I think it's really cool that a hot rodder finds himself in this world of, you know, high-end cars, you know, kind of high-stakes business. Tell me a little bit about how that transition worked. When you first came to work for Tishman, you had kind of a funny story how he just designated you kind of in control of overseeing a lot of different areas.
You know, when we first had that lunch, I thought he, you know, was going to hire me for the car. Sure. But instead, you know, what he said, Dan, you know, we're going to play with the car. The car's fun, but, you know, I've got this company and all these employees, and you and I are going to be the firemen and the plumbers. And I looked at him sort of funny. He goes, we're going to put out the fires and stop the leaks in this corporation. There's 4,000 employees, and a lot of money goes through here every day. So he trusted me, and he told, at the first meeting I was in, the board meeting, he put a chair beside him on his long table, and he says, from this moment on, this man, if he says something, you treat it as if it came from me. And it was a very powerful moment, you know, and I thought, I don't know nothing about high rises. So within the first 2 weeks, we had I think it was a 20-story building in Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard, that one of the main shafts on the air conditioning cooling tower went out in the bearing, so it's literally shaking the building. So those are the kind of, you know, you never knew what was going to happen when this fireman leak thing. So I went up there, roof, and I'm an avid rock climber and all that, so I'm not afraid of heights. I ended up being a steel worker too. But so there was nobody there. I got to see everything. I'm waiting for this meeting, and I brought my lunch with me. So I sat on the edge of the building, and I'm eating my sandwich, and I see a fire truck, I see a police car, and everybody's pulling up, and I'm looking, eating. Next thing you know, a door opens up there, the service door, and the police are there, and go, sir, don't jump. So the next thing you know, Mr. Tishman gets this phone call and says, your new employee's sitting on the roof of this high-rise. So I got a little lecture on that. But these are just adventures, and it's life in general. It's been a pleasure and a joy to be able to be with him. And you know, I was right there up until he passed away. And his lifelong friend was John Garrity, which the museum is well aware of. He's a famous drag racer and Bonneville man. We would just spend hours and hours on the dyno with these cars. And the louvers open with thermostats, you know, by itself, or you can control them yourself and just shut them. It's just a phenomenon. I was showing Tim yesterday the little wires that lead to the clearance lights on the bumper. Anybody else would just put a little small piece of tubing and weld it on the back and put the wires through that. Instead, it's a hand-formed piece of metal, and there must be 20-some screws in there that have got maybe 2 threads are blind drilled and tapped in the back of the bumper. And the front and rear bumpers,
which is maybe a 1/4 inch thick, maybe.
Yeah, you know, so they're blind drilled and tapped. And the gentleman that made the bumpers worked on them, I think, 6 either 6 or 8 months on each end. So it's almost a year's worth of machine time. Yeah. This is before CNCs, and they're all solid bronze.
Just beautiful.
Not copper, not brass, but bronze, and then triple plated. And he told me a story, the B in the hubcaps, that's cloisonné. Oh. And he couldn't find anybody. I think he ended up having to go to China. We didn't have relations with China, but to have those cloisonné badges, one in the steering wheel and then 4 in the hubcaps. And there was 1 extra hubcap made, and I have that at my shop. It's hanging on the wall.
Now we know where to find a spare to go with all the extra tires.
So if anybody needs a spare, I've got the spare.
I think that's when we acquired the car at the museum. It came with a whole bunch of tires too, because like you say, they're all special. You can't just go buy a tire for this thing. And so with the tire mold, we also received some extra sets of tires. Luckily, we haven't had to change the tires. We just haven't put that many miles on it. But everything down to the ostrich, leather interior. I mean, it's just no stone unturned. It's just a gorgeous car.
Well, this is 1978 to 1989 is when this was all going on. And inside this vehicle, he had Lalique, obviously the eagle on the top. That lights up. It's got, when you're, and it's a distraction when you're going down a freeway at night. So you got the option to turn it off. But when you're cruising down, Sunset Boulevard or in Hollywood going to dinner, it draws some attention.
I bet.
But there's inside this is a hot and cold dispenser to make tea. He had tea bags and this cup that's insulated, or make cold drinks in this vehicle.
Wow.
And it's got a roll-up lid. I'm sure you've seen it.
Absolutely.
And there's little things like that. It's easy to talk about it, but the engineering and the time it took to make all that is part of the reason there's 5,000 wiring circuits. Another unique feature, because I've been active in automobiles my whole life, is the door handles on this vehicle are just electric switches. There are no mechanical connections. There's solenoids inside the door, which we all did for having
the hot rod
door, but his actual door handle, instead of having linkages, is wired to a solenoids, and then those solenoids have got backup solenoids because he got locked out once, and realized that's so it's got an extra battery in it just to open the doors. And
that's really cool. Just all the redundancy and what a cool thing. I mean, you had to have learned some lessons while working for Mr. Tishman. I mean, you're a real stand-up guy, and that's the best part for me working at a museum are the great people you meet. And I think one of the lessons I learned from you is something that's guided you your whole life, and that's, any job you do, see it all the way through and do it as absolutely as well as you can. Make sure you do it all the way. No shortcuts.
It shows in this. This paint job, well, Dirty Doug that worked with me at Ed Big Daddy Ross.
Yeah.
Ed had gone on and was working doing other things. So Doug, all of Ed, his children worked for me. I had everybody working at my shop when I had the hot rod shop. But when I retired out of that, and I was working for Bill, I got Dirty Doug over there because Mr. Tishman liked him, and I think he painted all 4 wheels and a couple of fenders. But other than that, this paint job's almost 40-some years old, and you can see how it looks.
Isn't that something?
And because there's no Bondo or anything on it, it's still as straight as an arrow, and I don't think you guys have buffed it out or anything.
I haven't touched it.
You just wax it.
And we have it in a really interesting place. So we have it in the museum right next to a beautiful black Duesenberg. We have it next to a Steve Mole hot rod. We have it right across from the Red Baron and some other wonderful cars like the Boot Hill Express and the Outlaw. But when you watch visitors come to the museum, they come around the corner and this car grabs their attention. And I watch it and see it all the time. And there is something special about it. It's a perfect mix of hot rod and classic.
I like to explain to people one of the things that drew me when I saw it. As a kid, there was these early cartoons with Steamboat Willie and all that stuff, and this big car had to and I don't remember. I think it was a cigar smoking kitty cat or something. It was a cartoon character. We'd come up to the corner, and the hood and everything was so long that the whole car would turn around a corner, and that's what this. I don't think there's a car in the world that's got a 6.5, almost 7-foot hood on it. As you can see, kept the cowl very narrow compared to everybody else.
Absolutely.
And that hood's just massive. And then having the fenders accented, but to his credit, that's the way the original car was. He just took it a little further.
Yeah. So it's 2019 now. How long has Mr. Tishman been gone?
He passed away 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah. Neat guy.
Very sad.
Did he do anything else with cars? Obviously, you said he collected some other cars, but did he ever build another one?
Nope, no. I mean, what happened, you know, he, at the end when I left, because I got tired of the LA traffic, he got tired of having to deal with people in LA, so he became like a semi-hermit, sold everything he had, his house, everything. This car went to, I think, Craig Jackson's dad. I'm not positive, it's been so long ago I can't remember what I had for breakfast today, so don't quote me on that, but I just remember he sold it to, I think, them, and I was been told that they drove it and enjoyed it, and he moved into John Garrity's had a tennis court, and he had a guest house, and Bill lived there the rest of his years.
Wow. And there's a painting that exists of this car. Tell us a little bit about that, because if any of the viewers out there see this video and know of this painting, we'd sure love to find it. Yeah.
It was in the house when he sold the house, and he sold the house complete with everything. And I can't imagine whoever bought the house even cared that it was a picture of this car, but it was hand-painted by Stanley Stokes. And Stanley Stokes is renowned throughout the world for doing World War II aircraft fighters and planes and aircraft carriers, and or people's houses and their vintage Kitty Hawk planes or whatever. So Mr. Tishman, in his inevitable style, and he was a fun person. I'll interject another story in a second. He hired him to make this painting, and it was out of his realm. He hadn't done a classic car, and the car is on a raft in Africa. There's giraffes on one side of the river and an elephant on the other, and Mr. Tishman's standing here by the door with his arm in here in his plaid golfing pants and his golfing hat,
coming across the river.
Coming across the river. And it's
I'm sure it's a phenomenal painting.
It's an amazing painting, and it's about 4 foot by 3 foot, or maybe, I don't know, it's good size.
So if any of you see it at a garage sale, let us know. We'd love to put it behind the car. And it's out there somewhere.
And Mr. Tishman also, if you're familiar with ski movies and stuff, there's Warren Miller. Mr. Tishman took Warren Miller and they went around the world and they made the first 3 ski movies together.
Oh wow, that's really interesting.
He was just a fun guy.
Renaissance man, kind of into a little bit of everything.
He bought a big mansion in Beverly Hills. I love the story when he told me this. It was on the Beverly Hills area, big white pillared mansion, and they're going to tear it down, build another house. So he had his people come in, and they painted everything white, everything, inside and out, white. He put up the big tent in the backyard. This is 1960s. Had a bunch of ball-peen hammers, chrome-plated, claw hammers, chrome-plated, crowbars, sledgehammers, beautiful, had them all sitting there, invited all these people to this big party, and they got to destroy anything they want to in the house.
Jeez.
And it made all the new, and he just loved telling these stories about how he did all this stuff. So.
Oh, that's funny.
Good man.
Well, this has been so much fun. Talking about a remarkable car, Mr. Tishman, obviously a really remarkable guy, and you yourself, I can't tell you how much fun it's been to get to know you better, Dan. And I wish we had a Dan Woods hot rod here in the museum, because we'd be doing a video about that. You've done such cool cars, and I know we're going to open up for Cars and Coffee here in a minute. We'll have people streaming through the museum. We got here early to do this interview, and I'm so glad to have you here. It's been such an honor.
It's my privilege and pleasure. You've done an incredible job with this museum, and the Smith family, I knew Bill. It's just phenomenal, and it's such a treat and important part of American history to keep showing these things to everybody in the world and make them understand how passionate the car world is.
Right.
Because you have somebody that is this wealthy, and you've got somebody that's barely making a living, and they're both trying to live out their passion, however they can, with these vehicles, with 4 wheels under them,
absolutely,
or 3 wheels, or no wheels, or whatever.
And what's great about the car world, and anyone out there could probably back this up, is you could have a guy like Mr. Tishman and a guy like me who's building a Model A, and it's taken 10 years, probably not that long, it feels that way.
It can be,
but you have that commonality that brings us together, and all of a sudden it's just a person talking to a person, and that's what I love. That's
the key to the whole, since day one when I started this, I was very fortunate, and Ed Roth, the same thing. We never treated anybody any different, no matter what walk of life they are. You don't judgment them. They're just interested in the cars, so you talk about the cars.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Well, Just wanted to close out by saying thanks to everyone who joined us to listen in and get to hear a little bit about the fabulous Bucciali behind me and Dan Woods. And we hope you join us next time. Dan, I think it's time for us to go look at some cars.
Yes, sir. It's Memorial Day weekend, and I want to make sure everybody that watches this understands that without a vet, none of this would be here.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
we don't
I can second
give enough
that.
credit to them. And I'm very thankful that I made it back from Vietnam and I was able to serve this country.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to you, Dan, and everyone else out there. You bet. Come join us again, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.